A former NFL linebacker sounded off on some of the reaction to the DeAndre Hopkins signing. We talk about that. The Ravens taking a risky chance with one of their key defenders and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen every day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe. We're a 5-day-a-week plus more daily Ravens show. So every Monday through Friday, we have your weekday episodes every single day. Plus on the weekends, sometimes we have bonus episodes. We go live after every single Ravens game and every single Ravens piece of big news. The big news of this week so far, free agency frenzy week kicking off on Monday. New league year started yesterday. DeAndre Hopkins signed with the Ravens on Tuesday. The Ravens had a bunch more happen on Wednesday, which we're going to dive into. But a former NFL linebacker, I personally consider him kind of that low-tier star level of his time. He ended up sounding off a bit on some of the reaction to the DeAndre Hopkins signing, talked about, Ravens fans and what that whole situation looked like. So we'll talk about that and just dive a little more into DeAndre in the first part of the show. Then in the second part of the show, the Ravens, they're taking a bit of a risk with one of their key defenders, and we'll talk about what that means and who it is in the second part of the show. And then finally, we have a retirement, we have re-signings, and we'll get into some Ravens news notes and quotes and some of the other moves that happened yesterday in the final part of the show. So let's talk about it. A.J. Hawk on the Pat McAfee show. And A.J. Hawk, and there's a lot of controversy about how good of a player A.J. Hawk was over the course of his career. Brian Urlacher was also a linebacker in that division, and I know that impacted Hawk's Pro Bowls. But I thought Hawk was a really good player, albeit, I guess, not worthy of the 5th overall pick when it comes down to it, but still really solid guy for, an NFL linebacker in that time. I consider him one of the stars of when he played. But on the Pat McAfee show, they were talking about DeAndre Hopkins, and Darius Butler, who is another former player who goes on the Pat McAfee show, works with the crew, said, quote, "I love watching D-Hop play. I'm sure Ravens fans probably split on this signing. I'm sure a lot are saying D-Hop's washed, but he's a competitor. He's going to go out there and work and try to put his best foot forward on a contending team." A.J. Hawk goes, quote, "I don't know if you're a Ravens fan, how you can be upset with this signing. It's not like you're paying him $45 million a year. It's a 1-year, $6 million deal. I think it's all upside when you think of this." And I agree with AJ in terms of, I talked about this on yesterday's show. If we're talking Odell money, at least Ravens Odell money, this was a 1-year, $15 million deal for DeAndre Hopkins. Sure, I think we'd be having a different conversation, but we're not. It is a 1-year, $5 million contract, and I try to put it in context this way. If you're talking wide receiver 3, last year their wide receiver 3 was Nelson Aguilar. Who would you rather have as your wide receiver 3? Would you rather have DeAndre Hopkins or Nelson Aguilar? I'd take DeAndre Hopkins 10 times out of 10, and I get it's not the big splashy move. I get DeAndre Hopkins is not this guy that is prime Houston Texans DeAndre anymore. But even still, some of the stuff we've talked about with him is he fits a role. He's somebody that can go up and catch a contested pass for you. He's a bigger bodied player, and you're not the biggest body, but a bigger bodied player. And so with AJ Hawk saying this, I understand where Ravens fans, like, if you are upset with the signing, I understand where you're coming from. I know AJ Hawk said he doesn't know how. For me, covering this team, being around this team, and obviously, being, a fan of this team, you get how, you go down this well so many times, and the Ravens hit rate on these veteran receivers, it's not particularly great. They have hit on some. I'm not saying they haven't, but for the most part, it's just been, they've struggled at finding wide receivers for the majority of their franchise history. Recently, you've had examples of guys like Sammy Watkins, Deshaun Jackson, Des Bryant, Jeremy Maclin. The list goes on and on and on there. But I do think that DeAndre is not that he's like he's different from all those guys, but I think he is a better player than a lot of those guys were when the Ravens brought them in. And with him being 33 at the start of the season, I get that you're probably going to have to factor in some missed games with him as well. But there are two sides to the reaction. I think it was a very split reaction, like Darius Butler ended up saying, where he ended up talking about, hey, look, he is a competitor. He's going to go out there and work. And does that mean that it's going to work out just because he's a competitor? Of course not. He's going to have to go out there and prove it. But you're not asking him to come in and be the number one. In a lesser role, I think it should benefit DeAndre to be a situational thing. And with that will come, I think, better health. The last season he was healthy because he has had pretty injury-plagued seasons 3 of the last 4 years. But that 1 year he was healthy, he did catch a bunch of passes. He had over 1,000 yards. He had 7 touchdowns in a year where the Titans quarterbacks combined for 12 total. So he can still be a go-to guy. But I think the luxury of having DeAndre Hopkins in this offense on the deal that he's on is that he's still a really good player. But, top 5 guy anymore, he's not that. And nobody, I think, is trying to sell him as that. But the thing is, we saw another wide receiver go off the board yesterday. Mike Williams goes back to the Chargers, 1 year, $6 million deal. 1 year, $6 million deal. It's essentially the same deal as DeAndre Hopkins. And I'll tell you, if the Ravens had signed Mike Williams to that deal instead of DeAndre Hopkins, it would have been a signing I would not have liked. I get that Mike Williams is a contested ball guy. He is someone that fits a skill set need, but that is a more injury-prone player. I don't think Mike Williams is as good as DeAndre Hopkins at this point, despite the age difference. I think DeAndre, when you talk about some of those guys that we did talk about on this show before, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, et cetera, even like Christian Kirk, the guys that I would have taken over DeAndre Hopkins from the list I was talking about, I would have taken Devontae Adams over him, most definitely. Definitely probably Cooper Kupp as well, but I think that contract's going to look a little bit bigger. This wide receiver market has been pretty rich, and getting DeAndre on the deals that they got him on, to me, is a good thing. It's a 1-year contract, so you're not investing money beyond this season. I think that, if you want to play it that way, that's also good. And he's also a guy that can fill in a leadership role for you too, where he has been around the league. He has been in a lot of different situations. That wide receiver room is young. So it always felt like they were going to bring in a veteran. I get if you wanted that splash Devontae Adams move. That would have been my number one choice. I would have loved Devontae in this offense because he right now is still a number one elite wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins is not. But it's a low-risk signing, in my opinion, because the Ravens can also still continue to add, and they did that with Tyler Wallace, which we'll get to in the final part of the show, but they can also still draft somebody. I don't expect them to spend a first-round pick on a wide receiver, but this doesn't necessarily stop them from adding another vet if they wanted to. I guess Tyler Wallace is probably that player. That was probably the guy, but they could still potentially add another guy there. But if it's not, you still have other options that you can work in. Plus, he's a guy that if Zay and Rashod have to deal with injuries, and knock on wood that nobody does on that Ravens team, but if that is the case, you feel a lot better with DeAndre being able to step in. And while a lot of veteran receivers could have also stepped in, the flexibility of getting DeAndre on that lower price point is going to help them make other moves. And I hope that they make a bigger move than a DeAndre Hopkins, because I said it on yesterday's show. This cannot be the only move the Ravens make from the outside. And they signed a linebacker yesterday, which we'll talk about. But again, I mean, go out there and make a splash. Go out there and be aggressive, both in free agency, trades, and in the draft as well. Those are all things Baltimore should do. But in my opinion, again, I understand the side of you don't like the signing. If you don't, I understand and I respect that. I do. But I do like it. I do think that this is a good move for Baltimore, and I think that if he can stay healthy, we know that the Ravens have been able to kind of rejuvenate careers of vets who maybe are looking for one last payday. Maybe you're looking for a spot to go compete and win a Super Bowl. And I think that for DeAndre, he's going to be in a competitive spot. Darius Butler mentioned that as well. But again, it is an upside deal a little bit because the worst thing that happens here is DeAndre gets hurt. He's on and off the field, and you're kind of scrambling again. And hopefully at that point, Tylan Wallace is ready to take a jump, or Tez Walker is ready to take a jump. Where I think that last year it was a little more difficult to envision that for both those guys. That's worst case scenario. But even if it does come down to that, it'd be a lot different if it was DeAndre Hopkins is your main target, your main guy. Because then if he goes down, you have nobody. But if he does go down this season, or it doesn't work out, and he loses another step, you still have two really solid wide receivers in Zay and Rashod Bateman. That is where that depth piece comes in. And I'm willing to take the risk of DeAndre Hopkins bouncing back on $5 million per season. Because again, the risk of taking on Odell and that $15 million was that he wasn't going to contribute the way that they needed him to on that contract. And the expectations were already sky high for Odell when he signed that deal. And obviously it didn't work out. For DeAndre, you can kind of temper the expectations, but still hope that, yes, he can bounce back to, again, not 5 years ago DeAndre, but a guy that can be a really reliable contributor week in and week out. So very mixed reaction from the Ravens fan base over the course of the last, 24 hours, 48 hours, whenever you're watching or listening to this, on the DeAndre Hopkins situation. But again, a move that I would probably put in that B plus category for Baltimore because of the contract, because of the player DeAndre Hopkins still can be. And like AJ Hawk said, it is kind of all upside here. But he, I guess, does not understand the side of people being upset about the DeAndre Hopkins move. And he certainly let it be known on Wednesday. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about Baltimore taking a risk with a key defender. Stay tuned, plenty to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan out long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. We're back, our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday edition of the show. Free agency frenzy in full swing for the Ravens and for the rest of the NFL. It has been a little, really, actually a lot more wild than usual across the league. It always has those big moves that happen, surprises, but really just feels like we're getting moves left and right still, even continuously over the last 3 days. And it's fun like that. Hopefully it continues, and hopefully the Ravens are in on the action. But they did take a risk with a key defender yesterday, as with the new league year starting. It was announced that the Ravens gave Ardarius Washington the $3.263 million right of first refusal tender. Now that means that if Washington signs an offer sheet with another team, the Ravens do have a chance to match that. But if they don't, they'd lose him for no compensation at all. So Ardarius Washington is a restricted free agent. They could have tendered him, given him a first round, a second round tender. Obviously, he wasn't drafted, so, original round tender wouldn't have really mattered in that case. But the actual money that goes into it, I think is probably some of why the Ravens chose this instead. It's about $2 million less to do right of first refusal as opposed to the second round tender. But I think that with Ardarius, the Ravens now run the risk, like just was put out there, if the Ravens get kind of the rug pulled out on them and a team really likes Ardarius, really likes what he brings to the table, and a team with cap space offers him a big deal and the Ravens cannot match that, now there's nothing. They lose him for nothing if they don't want to match that deal. Now, I feel like the Ravens will match almost any deal. Again, if it is crazy financials and, we're talking like 3 years, $30 million, I don't think the Ravens will match that. I feel like, based off of Ardarius' tweets on social media recently, definitely feels like the Ravens and Ardarius weren't able to agree on something. But I think that how this conversation probably went was, again, Ardarius had his number, the Ravens had their number, and definitely weren't able to figure out where in the middle they could meet. Now, the Ravens probably said to him, okay, go out there and see your market, see what it is. If you can find something, that's great. If you can't, come back to us. And, that tender still will be there. So Ardarius can sign that tender. It can be a 1 year, $3.2 million tender. He hits unrestricted free agency next season. But it is a risk to take, because if they put the second round tender on him, it is highly unlikely any team would go out there and sign him, because that would mean that if a team signed him, they would have to give a second round pick to the Ravens if the Ravens did not want to match that deal. So now with this, if he does leave, there's no compensation coming back your way. And Ardarius was a really key part of Baltimore's defense last season. Now, he has had injury issues over the course of his career, but Jonas Schaefer pulled a really good stat here to kind of demonstrate how important Ardarius was to them last year. The Ravens' 2024 defense with Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams on the field together last year, 30th in EPA per pass play. Now, their defense with Hamilton and Ardarius Washington on the field together, first in EPA per pass play. So Ardarius is someone that has, he's a guy at TCU that fell out of the draft due to his size. He is fought back vehemently to become a key cog on a really good defense, and I think he deserves to be rewarded for that. Now, the Ravens can't afford to pay everybody, so if Ardarius came in with a big number and the Ravens said, hey, we really like you, we really want to bring you back, but, it can't be at that point. Ardarius knows his value. He knows his worth. He knows what he wants to be paid. And I think that a team, depending on what that number is, will want to pay him, because he's a really good player. He's tenacious. He can be a ball hawk. He's a hard hitter for his size. And I think that we saw that he can be a starting safety in this league, whether it's in Baltimore or somewhere else. But it never really felt like Ardarius ever had a shot to leave. But now it still feels like that to me, honestly. It still feels like the Ravens will match anything unless that crazy offer comes through. But now there's a shot that he does, and he will get an offer, and we might get news come across whenever days, weeks that he did sign an offer sheet with a team. Now the Ravens would have an opportunity to match that if he does. Again, he can't just sign an offer sheet and go away. If the Ravens say, hey, we see this, we're going to match it, that's what it is. But this kind of goes back to the Lamar situation a little bit, where they did the whole non-exclusive franchise tag thing. He goes out there and, other teams essentially are doing the Ravens' work for them, because it feels like the Ravens are just going to bring Ardarius back anyway, unless that big deal comes through. And the difference with Lamar is that the team would have to give up 2 first-round picks alongside giving him all that money. With Ardarius, the contract is, of course, going to be nowhere near Lamar's deal, and there's no draft compensation attached to get, in my opinion, a really good player. So, again, you can't keep everybody. And if Ardarius leaves, I think it does kind of shift how the Ravens approach this offseason in ways. It feels like while safety was still a position the Ravens most definitely should have drafted with Ardarius there or not, if Ardarius is not in the fold, well, maybe, that need jumps up the list for you, because at this point, Marcus Williams, it didn't work out. He's gone. Eddie Jackson gone last season. You need guys there. And the key is going to be to unlock this defense fully. Kyle Hamilton played great on the back end last year, but you want to have him in that roamer role all across the defense, lining up in different positions. That's where Kyle Hamilton excels best. Not that you can't play other spots on the defense, obviously, like we saw. But I think my prediction is Ardarius still comes back. It's just a little bit of a riskier formula to him actually coming back that pathway. But again, this could just be a way for the Ravens to get an extension in, and they say, okay, well, all right, the market a little stronger than we thought it was going to be. It came back with an offer here. All right, we'll match that, and here's your deal. But again, if it's that 3-year, $30 million, like $10 million per season, and even could be a little less than that when it comes to what the Ravens are willing to match, maybe Ardarius does leave. So a little bit of uncertainty there, but we will see how that all unfolds. Coming up in the final part of the show, lots of Ravens news happened on Wednesday. Michael Pierce, Tylan Wallace, a new linebacker, and so much more. We'll talk about all that next on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday. Week 1 of free agency almost officially in the books. And again, what a wild week it has been. This is a really fun time in the offseason for me. I love kind of breaking things down, figuring out what moves will be next for Baltimore and honestly across the NFL too. The landscape is changing. And for Baltimore trying to compete for a Super Bowl, we're going to be covering everything with this team as we always do on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, video form, audio form, same show, either way you want to watch or listen. If you're an everydayer, first-time listener, somewhere in the middle, thank you so much for your continued support. And tell a friend, tell a family member. Word of mouth is really important in spreading the word here on Locked On Ravens. Now, lots of moves came down the pipeline on Wednesday. Biggest one, in my opinion, was Michael Pierce. No longer with the Ravens. He officially calls it a career. 9 seasons for Michael Pierce. Undrafted out of Samford, and what a career he made for himself. Honestly, someone who I remember that Saints game back in 2018, preseason, he was fighting for a roster spot, and he put on the game of his life. He made the roster, in my opinion, off of that game. Had a great preseason otherwise, but still, that solidified it for him. And went on to become this really respected defensive lineman across the league. He made such an impact not only for the Ravens, but obviously he played for the Vikings, had an impact there. He moved around a little bit, but came back to the Ravens and still was dominant. This is a guy that was still playing extremely high-level football. And in my opinion, we talked, Patrick McCary, Brandon Stevens, Malik Harris, and Chris Board. This is the biggest loss for the Ravens. And it's honestly, to me, not close. Pierce was a stabilizing force on the defensive line for Baltimore, and while he had kind of hinted at this for the last couple of seasons, it felt like he might have come back for one more, although I think the dead giveaway was teammates signing a helmet for him at his locker after the Buffalo loss. So that probably, could have told you enough to say, hey, probably retiring at the end of the season here once it's all said and done. But this is a big loss, and the Ravens with Brent Urban as a free agent, and it's now Nnamdi Madubuike, Travis Jones, and Broderick Washington. Maybe a Calais Campbell comes back. Maybe they sign another vet. Maybe they go young and draft 2 guys. Maybe an undrafted guy makes the roster. I don't know how it works, but Ravens now have a big hole to fill on the defensive line, both figuratively and literally. So shout out to Michael Pierce for an incredible NFL career, and it's something to be celebrated, but definitely a tough loss for the Ravens, both on and off the field, as he also is just an awesome person in general. Tylan Wallace is back. We mentioned that at the beginning of the show. Tylan Wallace back on a 1-year deal for Baltimore, $2.25 million. And this is a move that was pretty expected. Seemed like every day that was going by, seemed like, okay, is he going to come back? Felt like that. I expected that move to happen on the first day of free agency just because it felt like a match made in heaven from both sides. You get to Wednesday, you're like, okay, what's going on here? But I'm glad Tylan is back. Is a 4th wide receiver, or maybe 5th, depending on how you feel about Tez Walker. I think it's a great move. He's someone who he maximizes his opportunities. He is one of the Ravens' better special teams players. He has had big special teams moments, both as a returner, as a gunner. He's very versatile in that regard. And I think, honestly, Tylan deserves more snaps. I think the Ravens should try to work Tylan in more. And again, if you can work DeAndre and Tylan in tandem together, honestly, maybe that could work. Obviously, DeAndre getting more of that. I don't want to even call it a timeshare because DeAndre is going to get more of those snaps. But again, if you have your top 4 now, or I guess top 5, let's just run through it. Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Tylan Wallace, Tez Walker. That's a really solid 5. That's a really solid 5. Now, that 6 wide receiver spot, I still expect to go to an undrafted guy or a guy that they draft, someone in that draft process, a rookie. I think that rounds out a pretty good wide receiver core overall. So I'm really excited about the Tylan Wallace signing. The Ravens also brought in a new face, linebacker Jake Hummel from the Los Angeles Rams. Now, this essentially is a Chris Board replacement when it comes down to it. Hummel's someone who Iowa State Cyclone, so him and Charlie Kolar are reunited. And Kolar actually, fun fact, small NFL world, sealed Hummel on Tyler Wallace's punt return touchdown versus the Rams. So just connections left and right. Hummel's known as the special teams guy, though, played in 74.3% of the special team snaps with the Rams last season. He also, his coverage is something to keep an eye on as well. Not something that will, blow your mind away, but I think that, again, he ends up in terms of PFF, 77 overall PFF grade that ranked 23rd of 189 linebackers. Coverage grade, 46th of 189. Run defense, 23rd of 189 as well. Pass rush, that's 69th out of 189. Not the best there, but again, I think just a solid player overall. Not going to expect a lot from him, obviously, but we did see Chris Board play some snaps, and, you look kind of around Rams social media, what people were expecting. Did they want him back or not? Seems like he could have competed for more snaps on defense had he come back to Los Angeles in 2025. So, again, we saw Chris Board have those games on defense. Hopefully this time around they won't need him for that. Hopefully Trenton Simpson will step up this season next to Roquan, and we don't have to kind of go through that dance again of, all right, who's going to step up instead of Trenton Simpson. But again, it's not a needle-moving move. I'm not trying to hype this up. Oh, the Ravens winning the Super Bowl because Jake Hummel's here. Of course not. But it's just, okay, cool. Ravens got another depth linebacker. Going to play some special teams. Doesn't shock anybody. John Harbaugh and this Ravens team's going out there and signing special teams guys. So we'll see how that all goes. But another face. So if you just look at the free agency tracker real quick for the Ravens here, you have a pretty busy offseason through 3 days, not in terms of necessarily outside signings. You only have 2 of those, and Hopkins and Hummel. But Patrick McCary, Brandon Stevens, Malik Harrison, Chris Board, Josh Jones, all gone. Ronnie Stanley, Patrick Ricard, Tylan Wallace, all re-signed. Arthur Millette and Marcus Williams both released. The Ravens made them Williams released official on Wednesday. And then Michael Pierce ends up going retired. So Baltimore is a team that, again, will continue to look to upgrade. I think we have not heard the last of the Ravens. Hopefully another big move is on the way. But for now, we just got to kind of roll with what the Ravens have, roll with the moves they've made, and see how the rest of the offseason unfolds for them. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show. On the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form and follow along in audio form for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, rounding out the week with more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned. See you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.